So we have some interesting news coming from Impact Wrestling regarding the Knockouts division. Now, we did a video yesterday talking about specific knockouts. Of course, Taylor Wilde, former Knockouts champion, is returning to the company. Former Knockouts champion and Knockouts tag team champion. She's returning soon to the company. She was part of the last set of Impact Wrestling television tapings. But also, we had an Impact Wrestling knockout, Nevaeh, leave the promotion. And I speculated during that period in that video that possibly we could be seeing a scenario where we've got more knockouts coming to Impact Wrestling in the future. Well, it looks like that is actually the plan, because Impact Wrestling is building for the future and they plan on adding a few females to their roster soon enough. Now, according to Fightful Select, which of course is Fightful's Patreon service, be sure to check that out. They do a fantastic job. Be sure to subscribe and purchase into that. The company has, quote, several new women targeted to bring into the company. Now, this news comes off Nevaeh recently leaving the company after this week's episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. This is what Fightful had to say, quote, Impact has several new women being brought into the company over the next few weeks and months. So when it comes to those being potentially WWE stars, I don't know if that quote from Fightful necessarily includes them. Of course, WWE just released 10 superstars, including Mickie James and Chelsea Green, and the Iconics. Both of them could always return to Impact Wrestling. As I mentioned, the idea of the former Iconics Billie and Peyton Royce finding their way to Impact Wrestling is also a possibility. Now, the company could already have other women in mind, because the pro wrestling world is, of course, full of independent wrestlers looking to make their name on a bigger stage. Impact Wrestling, of course, though, is still making plans for the future, and it appears they will be focusing on their women's division. Now, this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, if I'm going to be honest, because the reason I say it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise is because we've seen departures from the Impact Wrestling Knockouts division over the course of the last few months. So they're kind of forced to bulk up that division by necessity slightly. Of course, they lost Taya Valkyrie. They lost Kylie Rae back in October as well. Those are two big names. In the case of Kylie Rae, that was going to be a name. She was going to win the Knockouts Championship at Bound for Glory. And that was going to be a name that they were going to build the Knockouts division around. So by proxy, they're still kind of scrambling from that one anyway. And Taya Valkyrie's Taya Valkyrie. She's the longest reigning Knockouts champion in Impact Wrestling history. They need to replace her. And they're going to be doing that by bringing in these new talents. Now, as far as who these new talents are, again, I know obviously because of the timing of the report and the timing of the releases by WWE last week, I know some people would be saying, well, doesn't that mean guaranteed that we're going to have Chelsea Green, Mickie James, Billie, Peyton Royce, etc.? Does that mean they're going to be coming to the company? Not necessarily, given the way that Impact works. If you look at, for instance, Taylor Wilde is a great example of this. If you look at Taylor Wilde, you would actually see that her return had actually been planned for a long time. And because it had been planned for a long time, it would lead one to suggest that when it says that Impact Wrestling are looking to bolster their Knockouts division, that's probably been in the pipeline for a while. Now, that's not to say, of course, that Chelsea Green, Mickie James, and the Iconics won't come back to Impact Wrestling. In fact, I saw a comment on the video. I did a video the other day talking about all of the recently released WWE stars and would they be returning to Impact Wrestling in the future, or returning? Where would they be going rather in the future? And one of the comments I received on that is, oh, you must be a massive fan of Impact Wrestling because all of your comments that you've stated there state that you think the majority of them will go to Impact. And I looked at that, and of course, I really welcome the feedback for anything like that. I love building the community. I love talking to people. That's why we have the channel. It's about fan opinion. It's about fan opinion of pro wrestling, and that's what this channel is all about. And I looked at that, and I did a bit of a self-evaluation, and I said, well, actually, Owen, are you kind of being a little bit biased to Impact Wrestling because you do a lot of Impact Wrestling videos? Are you being bias and saying that all of these stars are going to go to Impact? And I came to the conclusion that I don't necessarily think so, because you have to look at the caliber of talent that was released. And there are only a very few select talents that were released last week that possibly could end up in AEW, or certainly I would recommend them going to AEW. Obviously, Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe's the name that I know a lot of Impact Wrestling fans think that he will end up back in Impact Wrestling. I could see a cameo appearance. Where's his money, though? His money, obviously, is in AEW. That's where the money is, and I think that's where a lot of people do want to see him. I know for the nostalgia, people want to see him back in Impact. For the nostalgia, people want to see him back in Ring of Honor. I just don't necessarily see that. As far as the other names, and I will bring it back around to female talent here, the other names, it's not as cut and dry, and I don't mean this by any means to be disrespectful, but these aren't in the case of Samoa Joe, these aren't giant talents. These aren't huge talents that are nailed on. They have to go to AEW because they're just too big of a star for an Impact or for a Ring of Honor, or they don't want to do the travel to New Japan. For the rest of them, it's not that cut and dry. So when I look at a Chelsea Green, I look at it and say, well, all signs really indicate she would go back to Impact Wrestling. That's where her history was. She's Laurel Van Ness. She's a former Knockouts champion. She developed that character in Impact Wrestling. She saw far more character development than she probably ever saw in WWE in Impact Wrestling. So it does make a lot of sense that she would go back there. We've seen Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore. He's already commented on Chelsea Green specifically, saying, oh, I remember her causing a lot of mayhem in Impact Wrestling. There's a history there. There's already a point of dialogue between the two parties. Matt Cardona is currently in Impact Wrestling. That's significant as well. And again, I know I've seen the response to that is, well, just because her partner's there, or is it fiance? I don't know officially what their relationship is, but just because her fiance is there doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to go there or anything like that. But that plays into it. And another comment, and I don't mean this to be a video where I just respond to comments, although I would like to do that in the future. Another comment was, oh, Matt Cardona has spoken about his desire is to get back to AEW. And I've never seen that. I have never seen that. I mean, you can prove me wrong. Absolutely, you can prove me wrong. But I've never seen that. If his desire was to get back to AEW, he would have stayed in AEW at the time. He was offered to stay in AEW. He signed specifically a short-term contract for something like 6 dates with AEW. The reason why is because he didn't want to be tied down to a long-term contract. He doesn't have a long-term contract with Impact Wrestling. The contract he has with Impact Wrestling is no contract with Impact Wrestling. He has a handshake agreement, a per dates appearance, that at any point he can leave and maybe go back to an AEW or do whatever he wants. After being tied down to a contract for years and years and years when it comes to WWE, he wanted a bit of flexibility. He wanted a bit of freedom. That's what he gets in Impact Wrestling. And it's significant that Chelsea Green could she could get the exact same deal. She could say, I want the same thing that Matt Cardona's on, and she would probably get it. She would probably get it. So I see Chelsea Green, to be honest. I see Chelsea Green as one of the names that I would be surprised if she didn't go back to Impact Wrestling because of the history, because of the connection she has to the people in charge, like Scott D'Amore, like Don Callis, all of those names. It just makes sense. It just makes logical sense. That's the logical direction for her. Now, could she go to AEW? Of course she could go to AEW. And we know when it comes to the AEW Women's Division that it is improving and it is getting better. And the AEW Women's Division, I still do think has a way to go. I still do think there's certain philosophical issues in how they book their talent that I would like to see AEW improve with, but there is a little bit of progress there. And I've seen people say, well, if Chelsea Green gets there, that can elevate them to a new level and it can take them over the edge. I mean, it could. I just know if I was a female talent, I would be looking at where is the best place for me to go in terms of the opportunities and the level of talent, the caliber of talent, and that's Impact. That's Impact when it comes to women's wrestling. Now, as I mentioned, it is changing, and maybe Chelsea Green will get an offer from AEW, and maybe the money is greater there. Not that it's all about the money, but maybe that will be her decision, and if that is, fair play to her. I don't hold that against her. I hope she has a ton of success. She's an incredibly successful person, an incredibly talented person, rather, and very good at what she does. Now, when it comes to Mickie James, I spoke about this before, that I see Mickie James going to NWA. I do, and it's not because... And again, this was another criticism that I kind of received about the video when I was talking about where are they going to go next. One of the criticisms was, well, they're not just going to go where their partner's going to go. They're not just going to go where their husband or their fiance or wherever's going to go. But that plays a part in it. Nick Aldis is an incredibly influential figure in the National Wrestling Alliance, easy for me to say, National Wrestling Alliance, not just because he's their champion, but also because he's heavily involved behind the scenes in running that promotion. He's arguably the company's biggest advocate. I'm pretty sure he's behind in terms of creative, and he's certainly a flag bearer when it comes to the National Wrestling Alliance, to the NWA. And because he's so heavily involved, again, logic would suggest that it's a logical step for Mickie James to be involved in that. Because, if she's looking for a pro wrestling gig that isn't full-time, or she can pick her dates and she wants to carry on with her music career, the owner of the company is the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins. There's an in there. There's lots of different avenues when it comes to Mickie James. And again, the National Wrestling Alliance just makes the most sense. And they want to expand their women's division. Their women's division is involved with AEW, of course, because the women's champion is Serena Deeb, who is an AEW contracted talent. Thunder Rosa, an NWA contracted talent, is regularly appearing on AEW television. Once her NWA contract expires, I highly expect that she'll become a full-time contracted AEW talent. But my point being is that it makes sense for Mickie James to go to the NWA. She'll probably have appearances in AEW as well. But if the NWA are serious about further expanding power now that it's on Fight TV and further expanding their women's division, I know they've had Melina in there as well, and they had Thunder Rosa and previously Allison Kay and all that kind of stuff, then it makes sense. It makes sense for Mickie James to be involved in that. And then finally, when it comes to the Iconics, to me, it's a no-brainer. To me, it really is a no-brainer. And again, if they go to AEW, if they go to AEW, I think they'd have great success there. But my point would be, if they go to AEW, is what realistically can they do? They can both become, one of them can become the AEW World Women's Champion, but the Iconics, a real selling point about them is that they were a female tag team. They were a female tag team. They were a female tag team prior to the Women's Tag Team Championships being created, and once they were created, then the thought process was, actually, this is great because the tag team title is going to be created. You've already got a ready-made female tag team for this tag team division, and I know they did become the tag team champions. They barely defended the titles, but if they go to AEW, what can they do? One of them can become the AEW Women's World Champion. Great. If I was them and I was saying, look, the gimmick here is us as a team. I know WWE tried to split us up, and I know Billie Kay did have great success as a singles. Well, she wouldn't got released, but she was very entertaining. She was very over with the audience on social media. If I was them, I would say, well, where can we have the best success as a team? It's only in North America. It's only Impact Wrestling. They're the only place that have got a women's tag team championship. And if that's the case, it's a no-brainer. Impact Wrestling have already proved they're committed to having female tag teams. They're committed to female tag team wrestling. If that is the case, it's a no-brainer. It has to be Impact Wrestling for them. Now, they could go to AEW, and I'm sure they'd be very successful there as well. But I just think if I look at that and I look at the lay of the land, it's more of an obvious decision there, I think, when it comes to the Iconics. And again, I know when we spoke about it previously, there was a lot of, well, you may be just showing a bit of Impact bias, or you're just doing this, you're just doing that. I think it's logic. I think it's logic. In the same way that I don't think Samoa Joe would sign a long-term deal with Impact or Ring of Honor. I think the money's there for him to be made in AEW. I think for those female talents, I think the money's there and the opportunity to really make a difference there is with Impact Wrestling, and that's the situation there. Now, as I mentioned, to round this up, as far as this being a situation where Impact have decided to let, say, Navia go because of this WWE recent release last week, I don't see that. I think any changes or additions that Impact Wrestling are making to their Knockouts division was probably decided a couple of weeks ago, or was probably certainly in motion at this point. I do think more names will come in, though. I think that's a fact. And I think the same way that we were excited for Slammiversary last year because it was going to feature some Impact Wrestling returns and some former WWE Superstar debuts, it's the same thing this year. And I think for an Impact Wrestling point of view, that's fantastic, isn't it? It's fantastic because suddenly Slammiversary once again becomes a must-see program and a must-see event. And it was their most successful event last year. It trended worldwide. It trended #1 in the United States. It featured the returns of EC3, Eric Young, all of those names. Heath made his debut there. So this year, we're kind of looking at a similar scenario. The Good Brothers, of course. We're looking at a similar scenario, and maybe this year it's going to be dominated by the Knockouts. And if that is the case, then that's fantastic. That's a statement of intent from Impact that they're still committed to women's wrestling, which they should be. And it's a very exciting time to be an Impact Wrestling fan as we head into the middle of the year and we head into Slammiversary, which is obviously one of their tentpole events anyway. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Impact Wrestling adding some new Knockouts to the promotion in the near future? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.